Joining us now from London with a uniquely British outlook on the conflict with Iran is I-24 News UK and Europe correspondent Jonathan Sacherdoti. And also with us is former Marine Corps intelligence officer Hal Kempfer. Thanks both of you for joining us. Hal, I want to start with you. Jonathan, let's start with London. While the focus has widely been on Boris Johnson inheriting Brexit, well, he more urgently inherited the rising hostilities with Iran. What approach is Johnson likely to take? Can we expect some sort of shift from what Theresa May's was?
Well, it's early days yet, so it's hard to know what Boris Johnson's going to do in terms of Iran, just as much as it's hard to know what he's going to do in most areas. That said, it seems unlikely that he's going to take a drastically different approach. He spoke in the hustings during the run-up to this victory in the leadership contest, and he said that now is not a time to start hostilities or war with Iran, and that Britain had to return to a diplomatic course with Iran, that we all have to return to a diplomatic course with Iran regarding nuclear development. But I think this underlies one of the main problems in the British and European attitude in general. Not to say there aren't problems with the US attitude as well towards Iran, but in Britain and the EU, the problem seems to be this determination to separate Iran's nuclear ambitions from Iran's regional behavior, when in fact the two are absolutely linked. And Britain's attitude is trying very hard not to inflame Iranian tensions, even with Iranian behavior seizing that British tanker, because they wish to maintain the nuclear deal, which more or less is dead in the water anyway.
Sure, Jonathan. Very surprising with the recent aggression that they would maintain exactly the way they are. Now, Hal, the Daily Mail, as we mentioned, reports that the U.S. offered to protect the UK and their registered ships, an offer that was turned down. And the report, of course, raises bigger questions as to why the British vessel was not escorted. And this was 1 week after the Iranian oil tanker was seized. Can the UK even protect its maritime interests? And why do you think it was turned down?
Well, Michelle, they just have a shortage of ships. There's just not enough British Navy to go around. And there is no way that they can put enough ships on escort duty going through the Strait of Hormuz to protect all the British ships, whether British flag, British owned, British interest, across the board. Frankly, the United States and the Fifth Fleet has the only naval presence there capable of really doing a substantial job looking after, basically escorting all those ships. I think for political reasons, there's been a lot of reporting that the intelligence that drove the Gibraltar tanker seizure was from the United States. There might have been some discussion within the British cabinet, within the Prime Minister's office, to try and keep a little bit of distance from the United States. But obviously, that's something they're probably having to think over again because it just didn't work out for them.
Jonathan, I'd love to hear your take on this. What are critics saying about the fact that there was help offered and that help was turned down?
Well, I think eventually Britain may well have to realign itself more closely with the US in relation to Iran. But for now, I think this attitude is unlikely to shift, rightly or wrongly. The criticism in the UK has been that Britain allowed this to happen at all. Iran had said it was going to seize a British tanker in retaliation for Britain seizing the Grace 1 off the coast of Gibraltar, and then it did so. So there was plenty of criticism saying that the Royal Navy had not done its job, or the British government had not done its job in protecting British sea traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. But it's absolutely correct that Britain can't protect all of the British flagged ships sailing through there. There just isn't enough capability. So why did Britain turn down the US offer of help? Simply because they don't want to look like they are playing a part in the US's new tack with Iran of applying increasing pressure on Iran relating to the nuclear deal. Britain wishes to stick with the EU and maintain the JCPOA as long as it can. And therefore, Jeremy Hunt said, if Britain can't do it alone, Britain wants to create a European-led military effort, naval effort in the region in order to protect British ships without it looking like Britain is, let's say, working exclusively with the US in that regard.
All right, Hal and Jonathan, stay there. We have more to discuss about Iran. Our top story tonight, Boris Johnson is about to become Britain's new prime minister, and he immediately faces warnings and threats from Iran. This all comes as the British-flagged tanker Stena Impero remains under Iranian control. Britain has called the seizure an act of piracy. Let's get back to our panel. I-24 News UK and Europe correspondent Jonathan Sacerdoti and former Marine Corps intelligence officer Hal Kempfer. First of all, Iran sent Johnson words of congratulations, if you can even call it that, together with the warning. What have been the reactions from Britain? I mean, Iran is acting kind of like a bully. Jonathan.
Well, indeed, I think the separation of the Theresa May policy from the Boris Johnson policy is an Iranian imposition on these events. I think it's their way of trying to give Boris Johnson what they see as an opportunity to make sure he behaves as they would like him to. It just so happens he may well do that, and that may not be a change of tack. But what we heard from the Iranians was blaming the Theresa May government for the actions of the Royal Marines off the coast of Gibraltar. Britain has maintained, by the way, that the seizure of the Grace 1 off the coast of Gibraltar was very much about where it was going to. They say that was Syria, and that it wasn't about the cargo or where the origin of that cargo was, which was Iran, Iranian oil. In fact, to that end, Britain has tried diplomatically to give Iran the opportunity to guarantee that that oil will not go to Syria, that the ship will not continue to Syria, and then they'd release it. And Iran has very much declined to do that. So I think there's definitely a gulf of truth between what Iran is saying and what Iran is doing.
And Hal, Iran is saying that the Vienna meeting is the last chance to save the nuclear accord. And I'm wondering, well, might some European powers maybe change their policies just based on Iran's recent aggression, maybe align more closely with the U.S., or do you think that they'll stand firmly behind the deal? What makes more sense from a military standpoint?
Well, I think from a military standpoint, what Iran's doing, I should say diplomatically, is of course they're saying it's the last chance. They want to put as much pressure on that meeting as possible. They want to see Britain stay allied with France and Germany, and to not take actions that could potentially, kick back the sanctions out of the United Nations. So that's part of the play there. The reality is they have gone over the limits of the amount of material, of course the refinement limits in terms of the type of material going up to 20%. So they're in violation of the agreement. The question is, less so probably Germany and France, more so what is Great Britain going to do? Because they always have been, of those three powers, the wild card that could actually decide to say that they did violate the JCPOA and start kicking in those sanctions.
All right, Al, stay with us, Hal. And Jonathan Sacerdoti, we're going to say thank you for now. We're going to have one more story and a question. There were some scary moments in the skies above South Korea today. South Korean jets fired 360 rounds of warning shots on Russian military planes. This after South Korea says those Russian planes violated South Korea's airspace. Well, South Korea says the three planes were two Tu-95 bombers and one A-50 airborne and early warning aircrafts. But Russia is denying that claim.
Information concerning alleged warning shots fired by South Korean fighter jets is not true. If Russian pilots felt there was a security threat, they would have responded immediately in a proper way.
And former Marine Corps intelligence officer Hal Kempfer is still with us. Hal, what kind of message is Russia and China looking to send out, and what can we learn from this strengthening alliance of theirs?
Well, it's a little bit unnerving. It's not surprising. China is looking at expanding its presence in the Pacific. Russia has a presence, but they just don't have the forces that they used to have, going back 25 years ago. So it's not too surprising that they would come together to counter the Western alliance that we have out there, which includes South Korea and Japan, the two countries involved in today's action with China and Russian bombers, or Russian aircraft, I should say. And so it was something that was rather alarming when they announced they were going to be flying joint patrols. And of course, they had to pick a place where both Japan and South Korea have claimed sovereignty over this island and the space around that island, because that creates another level of confusion, because South Korea fires the warning shots, Japan says, oh, they're over our sovereign territory as well, so they fly in. You got 4 different countries' aircraft flying in, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong when you have that many forces come together to deal with a provocative action.
And how do you think the U.S. is reacting to this? Is this something they should be concerned about, considering their military bases and stationed aircraft in South Korea?
We have a tremendous military presence in both Japan and South Korea, and I have no doubt. I've spent time in working with what's now called Indo-PACOM. It's what used to be called Pacific Command, and I have no doubt that they are working with the operational planning team, or I should say the joint planning group, trying to figure out what are our courses of action, what should we be doing, are we going to increase our number of air patrols, sea patrols, and of course also working with Department of State to find out an appropriate diplomatic response to this. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes right now, but we want to avoid what came very close to happening today, which is there could have been a possibility of an aircraft being, shot down. When you have 350 rounds fired in the air like that, there's a lot of things that can happen.
Absolutely, and we will be following to see how the U.S. is reacting. Thank you so much, Hal Kempfer.